In the early months of 1944, the German High Command was fixated on one question that could determine the outcome of the war. Where would the Allies strike next? The Axis had been pushed from North Africa, driven from Sicily, and now faced the growing certainty of an Allied invasion somewhere along Hitler's so-called Fortress Europe. The coastlines of France bristled with concrete bunkers, gun batteries, and minefields. But even the Führer himself knew the Atlantic Wall was too long to defend everywhere. If he could guess the invasion site correctly, Germany might repel the attack. If he guessed wrong, the Reich could be lost. On the other side of the Channel, Allied planners under General Dwight D. Eisenhower were orchestrating the most complex amphibious assault in military history, Operation Overlord. Every ton of fuel, every ship, every airborne division depended on one critical advantage: surprise. If the Germans reinforced Normandy before the landings, the invasion could fail in its first 24 hours. For that reason, deception became as vital as firepower. The Allies called their great umbrella plan bodyguard. A bodyguard of lies to protect the truth. Under that, the operation that would mislead Hitler about the invasion site was codenamed Fortitude. Fortitude had two branches. Fortitude North would convince the Germans that an invasion might come from Scotland toward Norway. Fortitude South would plant the idea that the real strike was coming across the Strait of Dover, the shortest route between England and France, aimed at the Pas de Calais. That was exactly where Hitler expected the Allies to land, and the Allies intended to reinforce that belief with every tool available. Fake divisions, inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and a web of false radio traffic so convincing that German intelligence would report entire armies that did not exist. To carry it out, the Allies built an entirely fictitious field army, the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. Its supposed commander was none other than General George S. Patton, a choice that lent immediate credibility. Patton's reputation as the Allies' most aggressive field general made him the perfect figurehead for the deception. His army was stationed in southeastern England, facing the narrowest point of the Channel. In reality, there were only a handful of real soldiers there, many of them artists, sound engineers, and radio technicians. Their task was to sound like an army. They were part of what would later be called the Ghost Army, a unique American unit trained to simulate divisions that did not exist. Using rubber tanks, staged lighting, and, most crucially, radio transmissions, they projected the illusion of massed forces preparing for invasion. Operators spent hours constructing authentic-sounding communications, orders, supply requests, chatter between units. Each message was meticulously timed and routed, imitating the habits of genuine divisions. The effect was a kind of theatrical realism conducted over the airwaves, an army made of signals and shadows. British intelligence services complemented the illusion through the double-cross system, a network of captured German agents who had been turned and now fed misinformation back to their handlers. These agents reported eyewitness accounts of vast troop movements in Kent and Sussex, perfectly matching the phantom transmissions of the Ghost Army's radio nets. The deception became self-reinforcing. German aerial reconnaissance spotted fake landing craft lined up along the coast, while radio intercepts confirmed chatter from divisions supposedly preparing to embark. From the German perspective, the evidence was overwhelming. As June 1944 approached, the false radio network kept up a steady rhythm, transmitting night and day. Messages described fuel shortages, map deliveries, and embarkation schedules. Every detail suggesting that Patton's forces were about to cross the Channel toward Calais. When D-Day finally came and Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, the German High Command believed it was merely a diversion. They held back their best armored divisions, waiting for the real invasion to begin elsewhere. For weeks, Hitler refused to release reinforcements to Normandy, convinced by a phantom army that never existed. The power of deception in war had been seen before, but never on this scale. It was a triumph of imagination guided by cold calculation. A victory not of weapons, but of perception. The tactical brilliance of the Ghost Army's fake radio network lay in its precision. Deception in warfare had always existed, but the technology of the Second World War gave it an unprecedented reach. By 1944, both sides had become deeply reliant on signals intelligence. German analysts at listening stations from Brittany to Holland monitored Allied radio frequencies day and night, noting every change in call sign, transmission pattern, and radio net structure. The Allies understood this obsession and turned it against them. Radio deception required meticulous realism. Each signal had to behave like a living unit, active at the right times, silent when moving, using proper call signs, and maintaining a consistent personality over the air. Operators in the 3103rd Signal Service Battalion became masters of mimicry. They built entire radio networks to represent divisions that did not exist, even generating fake traffic volume through coded chatter between non-existent regiments. Allied intelligence officers then studied genuine radio habits of U.S. and British divisions and replicated them down to the last procedural detail. To reinforce credibility, every element of the deception was layered. Aerial reconnaissance would show dummy vehicles positioned near the sources of radio signals. Double agents' reports aligned perfectly with the activity the Germans intercepted. The result was an illusion so coherent that it fooled even the Abwehr's best analysts. When the invasion came, the German 15th Army at Calais continued intercepting active FUSAG radio traffic long after D-Day, and assumed Patton's army was still preparing to attack. Behind the technology was a distinctly human element, the ability to think like the enemy. Many of the men involved in the deception were artists, engineers, and radio enthusiasts rather than traditional soldiers. They approached warfare as a problem of perception, how to make the enemy believe what wasn't real. They learned the rhythms of military communication the way an actor learns a role, studying tone, timing, and context until their performances felt natural. The work demanded extreme discipline. One misplaced signal, one inconsistent code group, could unravel months of effort. The operators had to remain invisible, their success measured by silence from the enemy. To them, deception was not about trickery for its own sake. It was about saving lives by drawing fire away from the real invasion force. They were fighting a war of the mind. The psychological toll was subtle but real. These men existed in a world of fabrication, projecting an army that did not exist, watching reports of German reactions that proved their illusions had worked. Yet they could never speak of their achievements. For decades after the war, their operations remained classified. Many lived their lives without recognition, their service hidden behind the secrecy of intelligence. The Ghost Army was invisible not only to the enemy, but to history itself, until the 1990s, when declassified files finally revealed what they had accomplished. In psychological terms, it was one of the war's most elegant victories, fought entirely within the imagination. At the command level, Operation Fortitude depended on an extraordinary unity of purpose across nations and services. Eisenhower's staff-in-chief, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, coordinated deception plans involving the U.S. Army, British intelligence, and the Royal Air Force. The scale was immense. Naval movements, radio networks, double agents, and even weather reports were synchronized to maintain a consistent illusion. Crucially, General George S. Patton was chosen as the public face of FUSAG. Though temporarily sidelined after an earlier disciplinary incident, his reputation among both Allies and Axis intelligence remained formidable. German analysts regarded him as the Allies' most capable and aggressive field commander. His supposed presence in Kent lent instant credibility to reports of a buildup toward Calais. Even German reconnaissance interpreted his inspection visits, deliberately staged by Allied planners, as confirmation of an imminent assault. Behind the scenes, British deception specialists like Colonel Dudley Clark, the pioneer of military masking, provided the conceptual framework. The 20 Committee, which managed double agents, ensured that the information fed to Germany was consistent with the radio deception's narrative. Leadership at every level had to coordinate not just operations, but belief, ensuring that every false detail reinforced another. Eisenhower's genius was not only in planning Overlord's assault, but in orchestrating this invisible symphony of deceit. It showed that leadership in modern war was no longer just about command of men and materiel, but mastery of perception itself. The deception that surrounded Operation Fortitude invites complex moral reflection. It was a campaign built entirely on lies, deliberate manipulation of enemy expectations through falsified evidence. Yet its strategic consequences were profound and humane. By convincing Hitler that the main invasion would occur at Calais, the Allies prevented the rapid counterattack that could have destroyed the Normandy landings. In effect, thousands of Allied soldiers owed their lives to falsehoods broadcast over the airwaves. At the same time, deception raised ethical questions that echoed long after the war. If truth is the first casualty of war, Fortitude demonstrated that deceit could also become a weapon of mercy. The Germans were not merely misled. They were made to waste critical time and resources defending a coast that would never be attacked. Panzer divisions stayed idle near Calais for weeks, while the real battle raged in Normandy. By the time they moved, the Allies had already broken through. From a strategic standpoint, the operation illustrated a broader shift in warfare, from physical to informational dominance. Success no longer depended solely on who had more divisions or tanks, but on who controlled the enemy's mindscape of the battlefield. Fortitude marked a point where the manipulation of data, imagery, and signals became as decisive as artillery. In this sense, the fake radio network was more than a wartime trick. It was a prototype for the psychological and information warfare that would define the rest of the 20th century. In the first week of June 1944, the air over southern England hummed with activity. Tens of thousands of aircraft, tanks, and landing craft were being prepared for the greatest amphibious invasion in history. Yet, across the Channel, German commanders saw only what they had been conditioned to expect: signs of a vast army concentrated opposite Calais. Their radio intercept units continued to monitor heavy transmissions from the southeast of England, precisely where Patton's Phantom Army was said to be massing. The Ghost Army's operators worked without pause. On June 4th, 5th, and 6th, as the real invasion force embarked from ports further west, fake radio traffic maintained the illusion of another army still assembling in Kent. Every message was crafted to suggest readiness, but not immediacy, implying that the real invasion would begin only after the weather improved. German codebreakers, intercepting this steady hum of activity, concluded that the storm that had delayed the Allies would also postpone their main assault. When the first Allied troops stormed ashore in Normandy on June 6th, German reaction was cautious. The commander of Army Group B, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, was in Germany attending his wife's birthday, confident that the main blow would come at Calais. His superior, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, suspected that Normandy might be a diversion, but the overwhelming intelligence picture, reinforced by radio traffic and double-agent reports, supported the opposite conclusion. Hitler himself, informed by his intelligence chief that the bulk of Allied divisions were still opposite Calais, refused to release his armored reserves. Even after Allied paratroopers had landed deep inland and reports confirmed the scale of the Normandy operation, German command hesitated. Their radio intercepts told a different story: that Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group remained active, still transmitting as though preparing for its own assault. Reconnaissance aircraft, flying over the English coast, photographed dummy landing craft arranged in neat rows. More evidence of a second invasion force. The illusion held with astonishing strength. For over a week, the 15th Army, stationed near Calais, received constant orders to remain in position. Hitler's personal directive, issued on June 9th, stated that the main landing will take place in the Pas-de-Calais area. He was convinced that the Normandy invasion was merely a feint, intended to draw forces away from the true target. German panzer divisions that could have counterattacked the Allies in their first vulnerable days stayed idle, awaiting an assault that would never come. Behind every intercepted signal, every confirmed report, stood the careful work of Allied deception units. The fake radio stations transmitted thousands of coded phrases, maintaining the rhythm of life in an army that did not exist. Operators rotated shifts to preserve continuity. Supply requests and logistical chatter were simulated with mathematical precision. The goal was not to overwhelm the Germans with noise, but to sound believable. And the Germans believed it completely. By mid-June, Allied forces had secured a solid foothold in Normandy. Yet the deception continued. Radio operators maintained FUSAG's activity levels, sending reports about delayed embarkations and supply shortfalls. Each message reinforced the illusion that Patton's massive army was still gathering strength, a hammer waiting to fall on Calais. By the 3rd week of June 1944, the Normandy beachhead was expanding but at enormous cost. Allied forces had secured towns like Bayeux and Carentan, yet the German 7th Army still fought stubbornly to contain the bridgehead. Every additional hour without a German counteroffensive was a silent victory for the deception teams across the Channel. The success of the invasion now depended not only on courage in the field, but on the continued strength of an illusion broadcast through the air. Inside the German command structure, confusion was spreading. Field Marshal von Rundstedt pleaded for permission to release the 15th Army from its defensive positions near Calais, arguing that the Normandy assault was clearly the main Allied effort. But Hitler refused. Reports from German radio intercept stations still confirmed heavy wireless activity in southeast England. FUSAG, it seemed, remained in place, its divisions active, its signal discipline consistent. To Hitler, this meant one thing: the Normandy attack was a decoy. The real invasion, led by Patton, would soon strike across the Pas-de-Calais. In truth, the deception was being sustained by fewer than 100 skilled operators. They moved their radio trucks between prearranged sites, broadcasting as if they were multiple divisions. Some messages simulated training exercises. Others described embarkation procedures or weather updates. Each signal was carefully timed to maintain the illusion of life and movement. The Germans, relying heavily on radio intelligence to compensate for Allied air superiority, interpreted these signals as confirmation of what they already believed. In psychological warfare, belief was the most potent weapon. The fake radio network's power was amplified by the Allies' double agents. Chief among them was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, a Spanish agent whose fictional network of 20 sub-agents kept German intelligence well supplied with fabricated reports. Garbo's messages, coordinated with the Ghost Army's radio activity, described convoys assembling in Kent and officers preparing for an assault on Calais once the diversion in Normandy had drawn German forces south. The synchronization was flawless. Each of Garbo's reports matched the Ghost Army's radio patterns, reinforcing the illusion until it became unassailable. On June 21st, 2 weeks after D-Day, Hitler issued a direct order that the 15th Army remain at Calais in readiness for the decisive battle. By then, nearly 500,000 Allied troops were ashore in Normandy. German panzer divisions, immobilized by indecision, missed their opportunity to crush the invasion. Even as late as July, intercepted Allied radio traffic continued to suggest preparations for a major offensive against Calais. The Germans, unable to distinguish between truth and deception, maintained their forces in the wrong place while the Allies broke out from Normandy toward Paris. It was not until mid-July, 6 weeks after D-Day, that the German High Command finally concluded that no second invasion was coming. By then, it was far too late. The Allies had captured Cherbourg, secured vital supply ports, and begun the drive across France. The fake radio stations had done their work. By keeping the 15th Army pinned in place, they had prevented the swift counterstrike that might have thrown the Allies back into the sea. When German intelligence analysts later reviewed their wartime files, they were astonished to discover that the 1st U.S. Army Group, whose every transmission they had logged, whose commanders they had tracked, had never existed. The evidence had seemed irrefutable. Thousands of messages, corroborated by agents and reconnaissance. But it had all been smoke, artfully shaped into the likeness of an army. In military history, few illusions had ever achieved so much. The fake radio stations of Fortitude South had not just deceived the Germans, they had altered the course of the war itself. When the dust settled over the beaches of Normandy, the truth of what had happened remained hidden beneath layers of secrecy. The German command, still misled by the phantom presence of Patton's army, held its strongest forces idle in the Pas-de-Calais region for nearly 2 months. Even as Allied columns advanced inland through the Bocage and liberated town after town, German divisions remained frozen, waiting for an invasion that would never come. The consequences were immense. By the time Hitler finally released his 15th Army in August 1944, the Allies had already broken out of Normandy, encircled German forces in the Falaise pocket, and were racing toward the Seine. The opportunity to repel the invasion, to strike while the beachhead was fragile, had vanished. In effect, the deception had bought the Allies one of the most valuable commodities in warfare: time. Every day that passed without a concentrated German counterattack allowed Allied logistics to solidify. Ports were opened, airfields constructed, and supply lines secured. The deception's success meant that tens of thousands of soldiers survived who might otherwise have fallen in the first desperate weeks of fighting. The fake radio network, a system of signals rather than guns, had shaped the battlefield more decisively than entire divisions of armor could have done. When the German High Command finally grasped the scale of the mistake, the damage was irreversible. Reports from intelligence sections revealed that for months they had been intercepting false transmissions from non-existent units. Allied radio order of battle charts that had once seemed authoritative were suddenly worthless. The 1st U.S. Army Group, an entity that had appeared entirely real in their records, dissolved into nothing. For the Allies, the deception of Operation Fortitude South became a quiet triumph. Its architects, men like Colonel John Bevan of the London Controlling Section and the American signal units who executed the fake radio network, knew that their success could never be publicly celebrated. Their mission had been to disappear into history, leaving only confusion behind them. Many of the Ghost Army's members returned home without recognition, their wartime roles buried under layers of classification for decades. The moral satisfaction they carried was simple. Their illusions had saved lives. By preventing a swift German counterattack, they had reduced the bloodshed of Normandy's first weeks. Deception, in their hands, had been transformed from a weapon of cruelty into one of protection. Strategically, Fortitude marked a turning point in the conduct of war. It showed that victory no longer depended purely on superior numbers or firepower, but on the ability to control information. The fake radio stations of 1944 were an early glimpse of a new form of warfare, one that would dominate the conflicts of the late 20th century, from propaganda to electronic surveillance and disinformation campaigns. After the war, historians examining the Normandy campaign would consistently identify German hesitation as one of the decisive factors in the Allies' success. That hesitation was not born of cowardice or confusion alone. It was engineered, crafted through the careful interplay of radio waves, double agents, and imagination. The fake radio network, transmitting from unremarkable English fields, had become one of the most powerful instruments of deception ever devised. By the time Paris was liberated in August 1944, the Ghost Army's work was already fading into the background of history. Their antennas were dismantled, their signals silenced. Yet their invisible contribution endured in every liberated town, every soldier who reached the shore alive, and every mile gained toward Germany's defeat. Some story of the fake radio stations that deceived the German High Command stands as one of the quiet triumphs of the Second World War, an operation fought not with bullets or bombs, but with belief. In an era defined by industrial warfare, the men behind Operation Fortitude proved that victory could also depend on intellect, patience, and the art of illusion. Their work blurred the boundaries between science and art, between soldier and storyteller. Each radio transmission, carefully coded and timed, was a small act of theater staged for an audience that would never applaud. The Germans, confident in their intelligence apparatus, became participants in a drama scripted by their enemies. The result was an extraordinary paradox, an entire army made of airwaves and imagination that changed the course of real battles on solid ground. In the larger sweep of history, Fortitude marked a transformation in the nature of warfare itself. The 20th century began as an age of mechanization, but by its midpoint, it had become the age of information. Power no longer rested solely in divisions and fleets, but in the control of perception, in the ability to shape what the enemy believed to be true. The Ghost Army's phantom signals were an early warning of a future in which wars would be fought not only on battlefields, but in the realm of communication, propaganda, and data. There was a quiet dignity to those who built and maintained the deception. They asked for no medals, no recognition. Their victory was measured not in enemy dead, but in the lives preserved through misdirection. They demonstrated that intelligence, when guided by restraint and discipline, could serve a profoundly humane purpose. Today, when the word information warfare carries darker connotations, the story of these fake radio stations recalls a moment when deception was used to spare bloodshed, not to spread chaos. It was a triumph of truth hidden behind lies, a reminder that in war, as in life, what people believe can be as decisive as what is real. And so, in the end, the Ghost Army fades back into silence, their signals long gone, their transmitters cold, but their legacy endures. They were proof that even in the darkest years of the 20th century, imagination could still serve humanity, and silence could still speak victory.